Picture the top of that Aztec pyramid you've seen in textbooks. Blue sky, stone steps, a crowd below. It is easy to turn it into a movie scene in your head. A few dramatic drums, a single victim, a flash of a knife, then cut to black. Neat, contained, distant. But the real horror of Aztec sacrifice isn't a single shocking image. It's what happens when you zoom out. When you stop seeing it as an occasional ritual and start seeing it the way the people of Tenochtitlan did, as a system that touched every season, every family, every corner of their empire, and every part of their understanding of why the world existed at all. From the Aztec point of view, the universe was on life support. The sun had already died in earlier cosmic ages. It could die again. The only way to keep it moving across the sky was to feed it. Not with poetry or prayers, but with something the gods themselves had poured into human veins. Life, strength, essence, often translated loosely as blood, but carrying a spiritual weight far beyond biology. In this logic, sacrifice wasn't cruelty. It was maintenance. The terrible routine upkeep of a cosmos that might otherwise fall apart. That's the first unsettling contrast. For the Aztecs, sacrifice was an act of sacred generosity. For their victims, it was a death sentence wrapped in theology. Imagine living in a city where the tallest buildings aren't palaces or office towers, but twin temples on a stepped pyramid built as a stage for killing. At the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, the main temple complex, rituals honoring the rain god and the war and sun god weren't rare spectacles. They were fixtures of the calendar. Festivals, harvests, victories, and war. Again and again, the answer to how do we honor this was the same. Someone dies so that everyone else does not. The scale is what really shatters modern expectations. Spanish chroniclers, who had every motive to exaggerate, threw out absurd numbers in the tens of thousands for a single ceremony. Most historians are skeptical of those extremes. But even the more cautious estimates still point to a society where human sacrifice was not a freak event. It was woven into the rhythm of public life. Prisoners captured in the so-called flowery wars, staged conflicts with neighboring states, could look up at the smoking temples of Tenochtitlan and know, with reasonable certainty, where their journey would end. And yet the victims were not always nameless enemies dragged from foreign fields. That's another layer of horror. The intimacy. Some sacrifices involve slaves bought at market, led up the steps after months or years living among their captors. Others could be volunteers of a sort, individuals who agreed to embody a god for a fixed period, treated like living deities, adorned, fed, honored, and then, at the appointed festival, calmly walked to a fate everyone had known was coming. Still others were children offered to the rain god Tlaloc, chosen because their tears were seen as powerful omens. Archaeologists at sites like Templo Mayor have found small skeletons buried with offerings, reminders that the cost of pleasing the gods was sometimes measured in the shortest possible lives. If you stood in the plaza below during one of the major festivals, you wouldn't just see a single act of killing. You'd see music, dancing, costumes, an entire city turned out, participating. Drums beating a rhythm that everyone knew by heart. Priests chanting ancient words. Merchants selling food at the edges. Children on their parents' shoulders catching their first glimpse of the rituals that would define their sense of what normal meant. That normalization is its own kind of horror. A community in which public death is not a breakdown of order, but proof that order is being maintained. Inside that system, pressure radiated in every direction. Warriors were expected to bring back captives, not just corpses. Prestige, promotion, even the right to wear certain clothes could depend on how many living enemies you delivered to the temples. Young men went into battle, knowing that failure might mean not just their own death, but the loss of honor for their entire family. At the same time, priests and rulers carried the crushing conviction that if the sacrifices stopped, the sun might fail, the rains might vanish, and their people would starve. Fear, faith, ambition, and duty all braided together into a rope that pulled more and more victims up those stone steps. It's tempting to draw a hard moral line between them and us, to imagine that we would have refused to participate, that we would have seen through the theology. But that has another disturbing angle. How familiar some of the logic feels when stripped of its feathered costumes. The Aztecs believed that unseen cosmic forces demanded human lives to keep society safe. Modern states, in different ways, also ask individuals to die in wars on battlefields, in service to abstractions like nation, progress, or security. The methods and justifications are different, but the willingness to accept the death of a few for the survival or comfort of the many is a thread that runs uncomfortably far. None of this is to excuse or romanticize what happened on those pyramids. The physical reality for the person at the center of a ritual remained the same: terror, helplessness, the knowledge that their body was about to be turned into a religious instrument. What makes Aztec sacrifice uniquely chilling is how thoroughly it colonized every layer of existence. It shaped city design, politics, foreign policy, gender roles, art, and myth. It created a world in which growing up meant slowly realizing that the sacred songs you learned as a child ended, quite literally, in someone's death. When the Spanish arrived and toppled the empire, they were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. They shut down the temples, banned the rituals, and used the sacrifices as proof that their own conquest was morally justified. Yet the way they described Aztec practices, with lurid detail and inflated numbers, also turned those horrors into a tool, a story used to excuse the brutality of colonization. In that sense, the victims of Aztec sacrifice were exploited twice, once in life by the system that killed them, and again in death by the empire that replaced it. The real horror of Aztec sacrifice, then, isn't just the knives and the altars. It's the realization that an entire civilization, brilliant in architecture, astronomy, and art, could wrap killing in such thick layers of meaning that ordinary people accepted it as the price of existence. It forces an uncomfortable question. What practices in our own societies, less visibly bloody but still destructive, have we surrounded with stories and rituals until we no longer see their cost? The stones of the pyramids at Tenochtitlan are silent now, buried under a modern city. But the warning they carry about the human capacity to normalize almost anything, if told it is sacred and necessary, still echoes. Thanks for watching. If you found this perspective interesting, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into history.